or involved. But I'm especially grateful to have my colleague, Rob Palleschi, who's also a member of the Rolling Center Board, to be with us here today. And we're honored that he's taken some time out of his busy schedule to talk with us about executive presence. A little bit about Rob. So Rob is the CEO of G6 Hospitality, which is the parent company of the iconic Motel 6 brand. I'm sure many of you are within driving distance of a Motel 6 or one of the hotels that's within the brand family. As the CEO of G6, he has restructured the business to separate real estate operations from brand and franchise support, and is reinvigorating a culture of quality and guest service across the enterprise. Mr. Palleschi joined G6 in 2017 as the company's Chief Development Officer. In that position, he was responsible for leading strategic growth of the enterprise, expanding business partnerships, and identifying ways to best leverage the company's successful domestic platform in international markets. And he'll be speaking more about the nature of his business and the footprint that it has, and where he anticipates the business to go. Prior to joining G6, Mr. Palleschi serves as the CEO of TGI Fridays, and also spent 12 years at Hilton Worldwide as global head of full brand services. He earned his Bachelor's of Science from Johnson & Wales University. So welcome, Rob.
Thanks, Eric. Thrilled to be here with everyone.
Great to have you. So I wanted to go into a brief discussion just about your business. So it's iconic. Everybody knows Motel 6. And maybe many people have stayed in one of the brands. So I wanted you to just talk about the nature of your business, and in some ways the complexity of your business versus other businesses that you've either worked for or that you're aware of, and then we'll move to another question after that.
Certainly. Thanks again, everyone, for letting me harass you for an hour today. I really appreciate Eric inviting me. And most importantly, I appreciate everything that all of you will do for us in the future. You are going to fix this mess that we've left for you, this political mess, this social mess, and now this economic mess. So however we can help and support, I look forward to your successes in the future. But as far as G6 Hospitality, as Eric mentioned, the iconic Motel 6 brand, we're different than other hotel brands in that we still own a lot of real estate. Most of the other hotel brands are pure brands, and they've moved to an asset-light model. By that, they're in the fee business rather than the real estate business. We're dissimilar. Today we own around 300 properties. Which is less than we've historically owned. At one point, we were up to 800. We've been selling assets, but we own a lot of real estate, as well as we franchise this iconic brand across the US and Canada, as well as we've got a couple of properties in India. So we're different from the regard of real estate. We're also a bit different than others because we are 60 years old. Hilton, as you may know, is 100 years old, followed by, you've got the Marriott brand, which is in the 70s, and then there's really us. So that age combined with the real estate adds a layer of complexity to the business. So our efforts initially have been to, as Eric mentioned, really to separate. We were running everything as one business. And it's hard to treat franchise properties in the same manner that you would treat your own real estate. And it's hard to treat your own real estate in the fee simple real estate in the same manner as leased real estate. So we spent a lot of time dividing the business into a real estate platform, a branding platform, as well as a technology platform to support everything. So that's been the journey that we've been on for the past few years, and it's helped us focus, it's helped us improve partner relations, and it's helped us improve our quality across the 1,500 properties around the US and Canada.
So Rob, I want to dig into a couple of those things. So first of all, who is your owner? And also, can you describe the franchise element just briefly? Because I
Certainly.
think that adds complexity that many businesses never have to deal with, for good, better or worse.
Right. Um, uh, we are owned by a Blackstone managed fund. And we were acquired by that fund about 9 years ago now, which is longer than most private equity investments, as you know. But we've been in the fund for 9 years. And they, through this fund, we own the real estate as one entity and then the branding business as a separate entity. The franchise partners are largely the Asian American community. They are the mom and pop operators that in many cases came over to the US in the 70s, early 80s. They needed to find shelter. They needed to make money, and learn a trade. So subsequently, the hotel business provided all of that. And today, the vast majority of our hotels are owned by multi-unit owners. And we define a multi-unit owner as someone who owns 4+ properties. We have a lot of owners that own 1, 2, or 3, which are still small, very, handled like a mom and pop, as you would expect a mom and pop to operate a property. The larger owners that have 5+ properties are a little bit more institutional minded, where they look at not only our brand, but they look at other brands. They look to grow outside of their neighborhood, throughout the state or throughout the region, et cetera. So we have today about 1,200 franchise properties across the US and Canada. And that 1,200 is really made of 700 of those properties are owned by multi-unit owners. And the other 500 are owned by the smaller, mom and pops.
So if I have my math right, and I'm not good at that, but it sounds like you said you have around 1,200 franchise locations and then 300 corporate owned?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay. All right. So nearly 2,000 locations across the United States. And is it Canada also?
I like the way you round up. You do like I do. Unless it's budget time, then I round
Right.
down.
Right.
But
That's right.
Canada, we've got 47 properties throughout Canada today, and 2 in India, and the balance are here in the US.
Okay, great. So obviously the hospitality industry, more than most, has been hit significantly by COVID-19. And I just wondered if you could take a moment and just tell us what it's been like for you to lead your organization, again, bearing in mind that you have Blackstone to deal with as well as your franchise owners, through this health, economic, and social unrest type of crisis.
Yeah, from the onset of the crisis, when we started seeing, the activity not only in China, but what we saw, hitting Europe, we became concerned. So we really started to, hunker down a bit and start putting some plans in place. Our tagline, our mantra for this brand for 30 years has been keeping the lights on. We'll leave a light on for you. That's our tagline. Tom Bodette, we're known for that campaign. And it was more important during this crisis than ever that we honor that. And we made each and every effort to ensure that our properties would remain open, not only for guests that need a place to rest, but also to keep our team members employed, as well as to stand shoulder to shoulder with our local communities. So we started putting in place some protocols early on. I'm talking like early to mid-February, protocols on what we would do to stay open. What we would do should the crisis really grow exponentially around the US, and how would we maintain our properties in ensuring that they're safe and that they're secure for guests and for team members. So that served us very well in the early days. Then as things in the crisis grew, we started putting some caps in place to keep the properties open, to promote social distancing, and to ensure a sense of confidence with our team members. We capped our owned properties occupancy at 50%. So 150 room property, the most you could sell, 75 rooms. So we capped the occupancy, and we encouraged our franchise partners to do the same, many of whom did. So we provide that sense of confidence to, again, the guests and the team members. And then we communicated that message to the local communities. So as the government started looking at closing, at shutting down the states, the counties, and the country, they recognized our need, the need for us to stay open, and they recognized the need that we were trying to be the good custodians. So I think we did a good job. To date, our occupancy is right around 60%. The industry's occupancy is in the low 30s, so we're almost double the industry. And even during the crisis, when the rest of the industry saw, thousands of hotels closed, and saw occupancy in the single digits across the US, the lowest we dipped was around 30%. And that was, I think, again, thanks to our communication with the cities, the counties, the caps that we put in place, and the sense of confidence that we gave both the guests and the team members. So I think it worked well. The only thing that remained a concern for us then, all through the crisis, and remains a concern for us today, is really boils down to indemnification. Unlike everyone else out there, we've been lobbying the government not for funds, not for dollars, not for help, because we've stayed open. We've taken care of our team members. We've kept them employed and working. We've been lobbying the government for some sort of safe harbor, because my concern is, while we've been a good actor and while we've taken all these safety protocols and we've taken all the proper measures, we could be subject to litigation that we feel could be rampant around the US, whether that be litigation from the standpoint of team members from a workers' comp standpoint, or could be from guests, et cetera. So that's our biggest concern. And we still try to manage that each and every day. We've not made much progress from a safe harbor standpoint, but I think the message is getting out there more and more, and you're hearing more of our government leaders talking about it. Hopefully we'll at least get some sort of sense of calm or confidence with that.
That's excellent. Well, thanks for sharing that with us. And that's a good segue, I think, into our topic now. So we're talking about executive presence, and this is where I want and expect our students and participants to be actively involved. I like it when everyone's involved. So I'm going to pose some questions, and I would like people to put their answers in the chat box, and we'll go through some of those. And then throughout the dialogue, I have some questions at some points I'd like to make, as does Rob, but I want to hear from you. So I'm just putting you on notice, and don't make me call on you, because you know I will. Right? Okay, so first of all, this is the question I would like for you to answer, and that is, what is an executive? Okay, so give it some thought, type your answers in the chat box, please. We'll give you a second. What is an executive? Okay, a leader of leaders. All right, what are some other suggestions? What is an executive? And think about it, maybe in particular, those of you that are studying for a JD or some form of law degree, what does that mean from that perspective? Okay, one whose decisions make a material difference for the organization. Someone that holds internal authority to bind a company and to execute decision making. Someone with decision-making authority or budgetary control, someone who's responsible for authority, a person who leads an organization, An executive is a leader. Okay, these are all great. So we're describing what leaders do. They make decisions that are legally binding. An executive is a leader who carries out the day-to-day operations of an entity in accordance with the wills of stakeholders. All good points. So now let me ask you, what specific roles in an organization do you think meet those criteria? So give me the names of the positions. So I think we can stipulate here that Rob is an executive. He even has it in his title. He's the Chief Executive Officer, right? Okay. So what is that? So we know CEO, all right, C-suite people. Jonathan, thank you. So what are some of those roles within an organization? And I would encourage you to not just think about companies, but think about law firms or governments, okay? All right, looks like Floyd gave all of them to us at once. I'll read them. Okay, Chief CEO Operations, so maybe that would be Chief Operations Officer, your Chief Legal Officer, a Chief Compliance Officer. In law firms, you have managing partners. And by the way, I mentioned two very senior law firm executives that will be speaking to us next week, so that's a good example. So Arma, a person who wears different hats, needs to be flexible yet firm in decisions that he or she makes. Okay, the CFO, Chief Financial Officer, partners, managers, cabinet level positions. Okay, person who has authority to run the entity and represents it before others. Those are all great points. Here's my list. So I think you can find executives in the C-suite for sure, and I think we mentioned most of. Maybe the one we didn't mention was Chief Human Resources Officer, or someone a Chief People Officer. Sometimes you also have a chief these days, a chief I don't know, information officer. That's really important, especially in businesses probably like Rob's that are heavily dependent on digital. You might even have a chief digital officer if that's sort of a brand that faces, you know, people more and more in the online environment. Let me see, what else would I say? We said operations, marketing, that's another one. Yeah, COO, Chief Operating Officer. Okay, legal, planning, and marketing, those are all things that you might see. Some companies have a Chief Strategy Officer. Rob, what are some of the C-suite folks that you have that maybe we haven't mentioned?
No, I think you've captured them all. I mean, we have a general counsel, a chief financial officer, a chief human resources officer. We have a chief development officer, which is something you'd find in a growth company or a franchise company, a chief development officer. We have our chief information officer, our CIO, and our chief marketing officer. So there's that, and in the past, we did have a head of asset management, but as we've been shrinking the portfolio, we've collapsed that position, and I've taken on that role.
Well, that's a big job too in and of itself. You know, asset protection in retail or hospitality is a big deal. I think many of you know I was Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer at 7-Eleven, and it's got a footprint. Rob and I know each other from a prior life, and I kind of joke that pretty much everywhere there's a 7-Eleven, there's also a Motel 6, and maybe even a Walgreens and CVS, right? But they kind of run together, and you know, unfortunately, both I think 7-Elevens and Motel 6 somehow happened to attract criminal activity. And so, unfortunately, for various reasons, that asset protection role in security is actually a really significant part of that business, and not one that I think many companies have to deal with. So,
yeah, that's correct.
So those are good. Here's a couple of other areas that I think it's important to think about interacting with executives and having presence in order to deal with executives and also to be executives. So we've talked about companies and law firms, but also you have outside counsel that you're dealing with. Those people are very senior, also executives. You might be dealing with executives at other companies. For instance, they might be industry groups. They could be peers at other companies. They could be customers, for instance. In Rob's case, he's dealing with executives at his franchise locations, these folks that own multi-unit multi-hotel franchises, right? You also have, and this is really significant, is your board of directors or your investors in the case Blackstone, for instance. And then you have people in the government. And as you're dealing with people at senior levels of the federal government, state government, and local government, it's important to be able to interact in a way that's effective and appropriate. So I think when we talk about executive presence, it's important to really think about it across all aspects of leadership. And I can tell you from my experience, in a role that's related to the law, you're going to hit every single one of those, and not everyone's the same, and you're going to need to be able to have skills that will allow you to succeed in each of them. So next question then. So we answered really who is an executive. Let me ask you what you think executive presence means. All right, what does that mean when we say executive presence? It's kind of an amorphous term. What is executive presence? So being able to influence and direct. Okay, thanks, Remington. Executives are hands-on with the operations of the business. Think about it this way. So let's say you're a mid-level associate at a law firm, or you're in-house. What does it mean for you to have executive presence? So we have commanding respect. Executive leadership's not only on an organization-wide basis, but also the presence within the day-to-day environment, the umbrella that keeps others under it connected, persona that lets everyone around know that the person they are in charge, that are they dealing with, are confident and capable of leading others. It's charisma, it's competence, it's confidence. Okay. You may have been the delegated executive authority, so you have authority given to you. Executives are in control, not laissez-faire approach with operations. Okay. Helping to find solutions. I think those are all really good aspects to it. I will tell you, I don't think I have a definition for you on that. Isabel says it's your ability to influence confidence and inspire your team to complete tasks or objectives. I think those are all great points. So as I said, I don't think I have an actual definition. I probably, in my opinion, it's more like obscenity. If you remember that case, that you know it when you see it, and you probably, I would add, you know it when you didn't see it, right? Maybe that's even more apparent. And so I think there's many ways to define and to exercise executive presence, but it's something that's key, and it's important to have, whether you're further down in the organization or you're an executive yourself. It makes a difference and really comes down to a lot of factors that we're going to talk about. Rob, is there anything you want to add to what your views on executive presence would be?
Yeah, I do all excellent, responses. I think for me, what I find is, and I respect most of a lot of the leaders that I'm surrounded by, my bosses and the partners over at Blackstone, is sometimes what they don't say. The fact that they know when to be quiet, when to listen, the ability to ask amazing questions, amazing probing questions, and the willingness to learn, the acceptance that they don't know it all, that they're always learning, and that everyone has something to share. So I try to always be mindful of that. I think many times leaders always want to be right. Many times they want to be the loudest voice in the room, the all-knowing, and I think that stifles some of the best thoughts. I think that stifles creativity, and really does not promote learning and growth. And I think learning and growth in any business is essential to the livelihood, the long-term success of that business.
Those are great points. So I'm going to move into some questions I have, but I would like, you and the audience to pipe up with questions you have, and I'll pause at certain points to get any specific questions that you'd like to raise. But the first one I have that I'd like to discuss is how should attorneys approach communicating in general with executives? And I'm going to stipulate a couple things about executives that may or may not be true, but I think often are. So first of all, they're very busy. They're short on time and are faced with competing and complex priorities. And they may not be law trained. Most CEOs or other executives are very savvy about the law, but haven't gone to law school. That's not the strong suit. And I would argue in general, that's a good thing because many lawyers are quite risk adverse and maybe don't make good business executives, okay? So taking all of that, what is it that makes an attorney effective in communicating with an executive?
Well, the way I would answer that is, I think it's critical for an attorney, regardless of the position, dealing with the C-suite in any way, shape, or form, or even dealing with the board. Know your audience, know who you're speaking to, and know how they understand how they absorb communication. And for me, I like to cut straight to the chase. I want and expect transparency, direct communication, honesty. I do not like or appreciate when someone brings a problem and leaves it at the office door. I want the solution as well. And so subsequently, my legal team is probably more assertive than many others out there. I want to be informed. I want to understand, not be blindsided, but for the same standpoint, they are attorneys. They're professionals. I respect them. That's why they're on the team. So I want to hear their opinion. They are counselors. I regularly call them counselors. I want that advice. I want that solution. Whereas others, I know, like I said earlier, some want to be the all-knowing, and I just don't think that's productive. So, there's a different way to manage each of us. But I would also say, not only know your audience and always be direct and speak your mind, but also don't hesitate to manage up. It's okay. All of us have done it. We've all done it, and we all do it regardless. I'm the CEO, but I report to a board, and they report to investors, and so we're all managing up to a certain degree. And so know that and take advantage of that, and don't hesitate to manage, whether it be the general counsel or whether that be the managing partner or the CEO.
So I'd like to weigh in on a couple of those points, and that humility point, maybe that's how I'd state it, is a difficult one, and I think I understand how lawyers think, and many of us think we're the smartest people that ever graced this earth, and that we know everything, and that we should know everything, and that we don't, that somehow that's a failure. And I think that's a recipe, number one, for disaster, but it's also impossible, right? In my experience, I was a general counsel for a division of Caterpillar, my company in Europe. I was based in Brussels, Belgium, and I had about 70 countries that were within the territory in which we operated, okay? So, number one, I do have degrees from Europe, okay? But I didn't have a degree in every single law of that territory, nor should I, right? Nor would anybody want me to. And so trying to know the law of that many countries in every single substantive area that could come in the door, whether it was contracts or labor and employment or litigation or regulatory, and we were in oil and gas facing business, which in and of itself is a tricky business and can be prone to corruption and other regulatory issues like export control. So all that is to say, there was no way that I ever was going to be able to know everything. But what was important there, to Rob's point, I think, was to be humble in a certain way and realize that if I had people that were smart, that were outside counsel, that did have expertise in those areas that I knew I could rely on and go to, that was enough, okay? And that was going to help me with my job. And so I would recommend or give that to you as another point, is to be humble and to know your limitations, be honest in your communications to the executives, even if it makes you feel like you're not the smartest person or that you don't know everything. Um, the other thing I would add, and this is slightly to the side of one of the things that Rob said about his team is, and this is important, I think, no matter what your level in an organization is don't don't let your boss hear about something from someone other than you, right? You don't want them to be blindsided. That is really one of the worst things you can do. And so maybe that's managing upwards, but I think it's just being smart. So if there's tricky things or things that you think are coming down the pike, you need to find ways to communicate them. Now, I'll use an example with one of my bosses, and we get along really well, but very different styles. He was a general counsel of a company I was with, and I was the associate general counsel. And he would handle it like this. Well, first of all, he was very uptight guy from New York City, and we were owned by private equity too, by the way. So that does make sort of an interesting kind of complex environment. Um, but he would say, I don't have time to look at all these emails, so only tell me what I need to know. But I also knew that he wanted to know everything, right? And so I had to decide, well, how am I going to do this communication with my boss? Because he clearly does not want to get spammed with random emails. At the same time, he also wants to know everything. And it took a little while to get a cadence there where I could understand what things he would like to hear. And sometimes part of my managing up was to make sure that I knew. The other thing is very much I need to know everything, and he was very probing. You couldn't just kind of bluff your way into something. He would ask you lots of questions. So you really needed to make sure that you told him the right things, that you had sufficient detail before you went to him, but you never wanted him to find out from someone else. And this is reality. This is the way that you balance relationships with different people that are executives. Okay, so let me ask this next question. What is the right way to communicate? So I mean the medium that you would use. Is it better to talk in person? Do you want to use emails? Do you need to use text? Do you write memos? What does that look like when you're dealing with executives? So Rob, how do you feel about that when you have your team speaking to you? And then what type of communications do you use with your board and your investors and your franchisees and other people that you're dealing with?
Yeah, I think I like a paper trail, and so I always like everything followed up in writing. But initially, depending on the matter, whatever is the most expedient. If there's an issue, there's a concern, I don't want to stand on formality. I'd rather have a phone call or even a text just to arrange a phone call so we can have a little bit of a conversation. Particularly since I don't presume to know the law. I want to understand and weigh the risks. And so for me, having that phone conversation is or in-person conversation is always the best, followed by documentation. And that kind of documentation can take on the form of an email, or it could be a written memo. In communicating with the board, it's predominantly via email or a presentation of some sort. That's usually after we've had a couple of conversations with a couple of the board members to get an understanding of the subject matter, make sure that we're all on the same page. And that could be subject matter, whether that be the next year's strategic plan or managing the COVID crisis and updates and their understanding of risks associated with remaining open versus closed. Again, have a couple of conversations with just a couple of key players, level set, and then you follow that up with written communication and or in some cases a presentation. But for me, I don't, my general counsel is always like, oh my God, you're so paranoid. You want everything in writing. I just like that backup, that documentation. So, but I understand in some cases, counsel would advise against that. I get it.
That's a good point. In fact, I'm going to get to that one in a minute. Can you tell me though, how much time, just if you were to hazard a guess, are you really able to allocate or even want from your legal team in a given day
Yeah,
versus your other
yeah,
competing?
if I was in a if I go back to Hilton, when I was at Hilton, versus today, it's different. At Hilton, at the time, I was responsible for all of the full service brands, which is Hilton, Doubletree, Curio around the globe. So we had at that time about 1,100 properties doing business in 96 countries, and it was a massive business. And we had, when we established this merged business back in 2004, 2006, we set up offices, regional offices around the globe, and we ensured that each of those regional offices had a general counsel, had a head of operations, so we had the skill sets there. So for me during those days, my involvement with legal was planned, it was coordinated, and it was always looking to the future, or it would be in the manner of addressing like just current litigation or a current matter, perhaps a trademark infringement issue or something. But otherwise, the conversations with counsel at that time were always focused on future planning, future budgeting, future brand standards, etc. Today, at Motel 6 and Studio 6, since we own a lot of real estate, we have real-time activities happening, from workers' comp to guest-related issues to state issues where states want pieces of our property because they're expanding freeways, etc. So you've got that happening real time. So that conversation with that team can happen anytime, any day, 7 days a week. With my brand counsel, it's more coordinated and more planned. It is in the context of franchise disclosure documents. It's in the context of future brand standards and budgeting, et cetera. So it's really split. But with the operations related counsel, which takes up the vast majority of our legal team, not only those, but it's also compliance, it's ethics, all of that falls in there. I'm having multiple conversations throughout the course of the day.
How would you say, though, as a proportion of your average day, how much of that actually is legal stuff, though?
I would say that's a really good question. I would say probably legal stuff is probably 15%, 10 to 15% of those conversations. Most of those conversations are related to opinions, candidly. Their insights on what their opinion of it would be from that legal perspective. It could be, I'm asking their opinion. I'm not asking their legal advice in many cases. I'm asking their opinion on ethics, on compliance, on anticipating government regulation, and or whether or not legislation is going to be, is going to be, impacted one way, shape, or form. Workers' comp issues. So a lot of it is, I employ them because of their education, because they've passed the bar and they have that knowledge of the law. But most importantly for me, it's them as individuals, what they bring to the table and how they can benefit the entire business. So I don't just bring them in for a legal matter. Our general counsel, our head of compliance is at every EC meeting, is at all of these conversations we've had, every single conversation relative to operating in the COVID crisis. We've had daily operations calls, and they're represented. And we just want their insight. We want their opinion. What would they do? Very much the same as I would go to my chief operating officer and say, hey, what's your take on this asset or that asset, or should we do this or should we do that? Or the guy I've got, helping with real estate.
So this may stand to reason, but what is it, why are you asking their advice? What is it that you plan to do with that advice?
Um, it obviously depends on the situation, but I'd like to gather the feedback from, from all the smart minds around the business. And I like to weigh it and balance it. And, ultimately, the majority of my job is to assess the risks. Is this investment? Is this brand? Is this activity? I'm weighing the risks. And so I want the feedback from the operations perspective, from the sales perspective, clearly from the legal perspective. So it's how to help weigh the risks to ultimately guide the business forward.
And this is a key point I'd like to make, is that as lawyers in particular, but I would say those of you that are MBA students or studying other disciplines and will be involved with business in different ways, you might think that the universe is the thing that you do. But when you're talking to Rob, it may be 15% or even smaller of his day. So he's looking at a lot of different things. So when you go into Rob, and definitely this will vary depending on the executive style, you need to have a way to communicate something that may be very complex, maybe very gray, let's say, in a concise, precise, and expeditious manner, to let him, and this is what I was getting at, make a decision based on the information that you're giving him. Because his job is to manage risk, but it's also to make decisions about which risks to take, but a lot of it's just making decisions. And so in bringing in all that information, including from lawyers or compliance professionals or other business folks, it's important that you present it in a way that's useful to him. One thing I was going to put in the takeaways, but I want to add here, is don't be afraid to ask the executive you're working with what their style is and what they want to hear. I actually did that with Dean Collins. She is my boss, and she's a very good executive this law school. And when we started, I said, "What's your style? How would you like to interact?" And she gave me some really good advice, right? So I think that's maybe part of the humility. It takes time to really build a relationship so that you have trust, but it's important to really understand how each party works.
It's while I understand in law there's a lot of black and white, I have to deal with gray all the time. And so I look to counsel to help me with that gray, with the finesse or the nuance of that, and that's where they go back to their experience, their education, their understanding of the law, and they will help me see that. But Eric, you're right. As you point out, it's make sure you understand the style and make sure you understand, how to manage up to that individual. A real-time example, just last week, even though I've been working with these guys for so long, everybody is working so hard, and everybody is so stressed with this new working environment and all that you still tend to forget. And I asked one of our attorneys, we were talking about travel, and we have regional team members that are deployed around the country that are responsible for a certain number of hotels, whether they be owned or franchised hotels, and they want to get to visit their properties. And my question to her wasn't about the process, wasn't about the law, wasn't about any of the risks associated with travel. My question to her was just, hey, would you feel comfortable traveling now? And she just kept responding from a legal perspective. And I'm like, no, time out. Just you yourself. Are you gonna be comfortable getting on a plane? That was it. And everything, and her responses came back very, very, it was all, citing, case law and citing. I'm like, no. If you have to go visit your grandma, are you comfortable getting on a plane? She's like, oh, there's no way I'm traveling. I'm like, well, that was the answer. That's all I was looking for. So it's tough because the environment's been changing, and even though somebody you've worked with for a long time still is you forget.
That's a really good point, and I've experienced that in my career, especially in house. But in many times, the baseline is you have to be competent and knowledgeable in your legal analysis and be able to communicate that efficiently. But given that, what they want to have is a smart, reflective person who can give advice sometimes that has nothing to do with the law. And I think that's an important part of being a member of a business team. We have a really great insight from Isabella. She said, I find that normally lawyers will ask executives for advice to have the understanding of the nuance of the particular business in order to advise them and to take the best legal action. And I would say humble and wise executives will talk to their lawyers and try to involve them. I would say that in my experience, especially in heavily sales dominated environments, maybe that's not the case. I mean, I've had situations where people avoided me because they didn't want like the answer I might give, even though I think I'm actually a very business friendly type of person and tried to facilitate success within certain parameters. The other thing that's a trick that you'll see with salespeople is the ambush, right? So they'll bring you some legal document and say, hey, here's this document, can you sign off on it? I need to have it for tomorrow. And part of your job, I think, is to communicate expectations and set boundaries. And a few times I've said no. I said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to have sufficient time to give you a response, and so no, I'm not going to sign off on that. Now, that's not always popular, but I think you need to realize as a lawyer that not everybody in the business is your friend, and in some cases they may not even respect your role or your advice.
And that's where the role, and that's ultimately, I think that's part of my job, is to make sure that I set the stage that it's a safe environment for our legal team, our compliance team, to ensure that they're not, caught up, in that scenario, a hot box, so to speak, and make sure that they know that I have their back. Because, Eric, you're right. The sales team will wait until the 31st at 4 o'clock and try to jam a contract through. Or if they're trying to do business, outside the U.S. or with franchise partners in our case that may not, that you've got to do the foreign corrupt, the background checks and make sure that you're in compliance. There's zero tolerance for that. And we've got to ensure that, in that case, yes, revenues are important, but following the law, not to be in breach with the federal government or, or other countries, laws, et cetera, that's paramount. So you've got to back, your legal team, your compliance team, and ensure that you don't foster an environment that would enable that.
That's a good point. And I would say that not all organizations have that kind of leadership, unfortunately. And, I've been in this situation too, but sometimes if you're in an organization as an attorney or maybe supporting an organization as an outside counsel that you feel like doesn't really walk that walk, right, and talk that talk, then you have to make a decision whether you want to stay there and whether that really works for you as a person and you also as a legal professional. I want to go to our students now and just clarify one question, and then I want to that I have or that Rob brought up, and then I want to dive into some of your questions. So be thinking about those and be getting ready to put them in the chat box. But he mentioned lawyers may not want you to put everything in writing. Okay, so can someone tell us why that might be? Because that's a really key thing, especially when you're occupying the role as a legal advisor for an executive team. And there's a couple of reasons that I can think of. So discovery from David, okay. You want to give us a little more detail? Discovery by whom? You can take yourselves off mute and speak if you want on this one. So what do we mean by discovery? That mean discovery by the press? Litigation, okay. So I think, as most of you know, discovery is a process that happens within litigation, and things that are written down, right? So Floyd brings up the attorney-client privilege issue, so that's exactly right. So some things, well, basically in principle, everything's possibly discoverable unless you can assert a privilege, okay? So if Rob says, I want everything in writing, and someone writes, Well, when we fix the prices, you know, or basically when we collude with the one franchisee, one of these, there's this thing called Robinson-Patman that's a weird sort of antitrust law that sometimes you have to watch out for in franchise type situations because you don't want to treat one franchisee differently than another, right? So let's say there's some sort of illegal, or when we bribe the government officials in India so that we can get the business license, we should do the following. That's the sort of thing. Hopefully you're not doing those things, right? But that's the sort of information that becomes discoverable unless there's some sort of privilege. So that's one reason. There's another sort of oddball one that comes in the context of mergers and acquisitions. So many things when you're doing a deal has to be approved by your executive team and ultimately your board. And there's a process called HSR, which is a regulatory uh, approval that the FTC does. And basically they want to see all the slide decks that everyone gave to the executives and even anything that they wrote, right? So in some cases, it's best just to say things verbally. I've been involved in some pretty tricky anti-corruption investigations where we only made our reports to our executive team verbally because of the issue of discovery and also the fact that we were being investigated by the federal government. So there are reasons why you would do that, but I think what Rob's saying is often the instinct of most executives. I want to see it in writing. I want to be able to look at it, and I want to make a decision now based on what you're putting in front of me. And if it's something that's spoken, that could be frustrating. All right, let's go to some of your questions that you have about presenting or dealing with executives. I'll give you a moment to put those in the chat box. All right, so this one's coming from Floyd. So in the current economic environment, do you expect your company or companies in general to trend towards incorporating the concept of, yeah, okay, this is a good one, of billable hours in-house, or a more complex or detailed type accounting structure rather than the traditional buckets of legal spend? So I think part of it, and this is probably somewhat answered by your general counsel. Her name's Amma, is that correct?
I'm a Romaine, yes.
Yeah. So somewhat a question for her, but I'm sure you're aware of it. So when she's managing her budget, how does she deal with the outside counsel, and what's the nature of the fee structure that she engages with, especially in the current environment?
Yeah, I think it would be different in other businesses, and we would probably look at everything in the context of billable hours, whether that's internal to us and what our legal team is deployed to do, and or managing outside counsel. For us, it's a little bit different. Blackstone, as our partners and sponsors, as many of you know, is very conservative. So they take a conservative bent towards everything. So subsequently, we are, we have probably a larger legal team than most. And we depend on outside counsel for more assistance or holistic view of things. And we will at times leverage a central resource at Blackstone for counsel, and they'll point us to their third parties, or other times we'll go direct to some of those firms that we have, already on retainer. That said, I think our team does a pretty good job of managing to budget, and they'll, for whether it be a litigation case or a lobbying effort, or just a refresh of our code of conduct, they'll put together a budget for us internally. I think that budget is based on collecting, their assumptions on billable hours, their team's resources, as well as any hard costs, and they'll put that together. And they do a good job of managing to that. But for me right now, where we've been going with this business in separating it to a real estate group, a branding group, and a technology platform, those efforts are are more important to me and more important to the end game than kind of micromanaging, some legal fees and stuff. So someone will come in. I promise you, someone will come in and will criticize me and criticize our general counsel, saying there's redundancies here. You could have been more efficient and saved dollars. We know it, we recognize it, but right now we need a specific skill set that's focused on real estate, a specific skill set focused on branding, and someone else helping us with technology. So we recognize we're not efficient. So my job in that needs to be to over communicate to our board and let them know that we recognize we're losing efficiencies here, and these are the benefits. And then they help me weigh the benefits and the pros and cons. But in some cases, particularly with technology, with which especially hotel and lodging technology is so specialized in many cases, it's hard to go to one of the big firms, a DLA or a Venable or whatever, and get that kind of expertise that you may need. And in some cases, it could be like workers' comp counsel. We have a national firm, and then we have a separate firm just for LA County and California. So anyway, long answer, sorry.
I would add to that that's an essential part of being an executive at various levels of the law department, because you actually have a budget and P&L that you have to manage to plan, right? And in times like this, you're probably asked to cut that, which includes sometimes making very difficult outside counsel as well as personnel decisions. And I think that's a part of the job and a part of being an executive and the executive presence. So let's get a couple more questions from our students. So this is from Remington. Remington's, by the way, a JD MBA, so he's got some business experience as well
Nice.
as education. So he said, in your career, have you seen missed opportunities because of poor executive presentation? So let's say, someone didn't do such a good job. And if so, are there any lessons not covered that you could have learned from those situations? And I would add, is there any time when you maybe didn't present exactly how you would have liked in your own career?
Yeah, oh, definitely. I all the time. Regularly, I do it all the time. I think it's, for me, where I've seen the biggest missteps is an overconfidence. Overconfidence in one's own ideas, and overconfidence in their presentation, and that zeal, that enthusiasm tends for some they become myopic and lose sight of the big picture. And for me, joining this business, I'll use this business as a specific example. My first day, joined the business with the executive committee. I said one of the, I've seen two great mistakes with our partners at Blackstone in my career, as I've been in and out of Blackstone portfolio companies. And I said, and I just hope we don't make any of those mistakes. And I suspect that you guys aren't. But the two biggest mistakes are translating what the partners are saying, and and by translating, I mean changing it to make it fit, your needs, so to speak. And the second part is an overconfidence that they love you, because they will love you. All private equity will love you until they don't. You've got to understand, it's a business, it's a model. Blackstone's model is buy it, fix it, sell it. We will be sold. They will never love us long enough to hold us forever. That's the reality, right? All businesses have a life cycle. And unfortunately, what I found was very quickly, the business was translating and was not listening clearly. And the business was overconfident. And the partners at the firm were saying to the business, quality is the most important thing with this brand. It's quality. And we believe a smaller portfolio of owned assets would enable us to deliver better quality, more focused capital investment, and a better experience, and ultimately push the brand forward. The business interpreted that. Remember, the firm was saying smaller, better quality, focused. The business interpreted that as they love us, they love our EBITDA, so we'll sell a couple of the really, really bad hotels, and then we'll sprinkle capital dollars around like fairy dust and not impact anything. Subsequently, going from a portfolio that was around 600 owned hotels to something that went down to 575 owned hotels. Capital investment was starved at the individual properties, and subsequently our quality continued to decline. And all the firm was saying, all the partners were saying was, again, sell assets, focus your capital, and drive quality. And subsequently, in the 3 and a half years I've been with the business, we've gone from 575 properties down to now 300. We have 80 properties under contract. By October, we'll be down to a portfolio that looks like about 200 to 220 assets. We're able to focus our capital investment. We've been able to improve quality, moving our online review scores to what was a number that looked like 2.6 to now an online review score that looks like 3.8 by investing in the properties, by investing in the teams, by engaging the local communities. That's all they were saying for years. So to your question about presentation, just listen, don't translate. Ask probing questions to make sure you understand. Make sure the entire executive committee understands and is on the same page, and they're all motivated to move in that same direction. And don't love your own ideas too much to where you become, blindsided. Sorry, long answer, I apologize.
That was great. That's why we have you here. So thank you. I'm going to add just a couple from my experience. These are not the greatest examples, but they definitely were learning experiences. And both of these happened at Caterpillar. Caterpillar is a Fortune 50 public company. And to interact with truly the highest levels is very unique and rare for most lawyers, right? And so as I moved up in the pecking order, I got that opportunity. And I remember one of the first meetings I had with the CEO, I was definitely the low person in that group, okay? And my plan, kind of to go with one of the things I said previously, which is don't let your boss find out from someone else. I also made sure my boss was as prepared as possible in going to a meeting. So I had everything printed out, we talked, and we went into the meeting, and I think there were maybe a couple of SVPs and the CEO. And nobody had copies of the presentation. And we had not set up this meeting. I had not set it up. But everyone kind of looked at me as being, oh, you're the person that's supposed to bring everything because, you're the low person in the organization. And I ended up giving my copy to the CEO. But you could tell he was frustrated, number one. And I thought it was a little unfair. But at the same time, sometimes that's just how it goes. The other thing, too, was it was exceedingly difficult to sort of speak from memory when you had to give your paper over to the CEO. So my point there is just be as prepared as possible and over prepare. The other one was earlier in my career where I was in a meeting with some senior executives and the general counsel, and he was explaining something that was a legal point to them that I had communicated to my boss, who then communicated to him. And you know what? He got it wrong. So he didn't say it in a way that was clear or even accurate. And me being me, I corrected him in front of his peers. And you know, I walked out of that and it turned out okay because I still managed to work there for 10 years, even though I made a big mistake like that. But my boss said, well, why did you do that? You know, and it was a good coaching moment because um, being right is great, and you need to make sure that legal advice gets communicated in a correct and concise way. At the same time, maybe doing it like I did it wasn't really the very best. Okay, so those are some examples there. We
And
have a
I
couple.
would just,
Oh
and
yeah, go ahead.
I would thank you for that. Candidly, I would appreciate that, and that, in my view, should be celebrated because you know you're all at the end of the day. Anybody wants is just they want the right answers, right? They want the right information, the most current, most timely information, and or as close to the right answer as possible. And to even wait to correct him afterwards, there would have been a lengthy delay because he wouldn't have gone out immediately. So I just commend you for that. And I would, again, I think if you know the audience, then you should feel comfortable with that. But for me, that's a winner.
Here's a question along know the audience, and you I talked about a specific instance that I'd like you to relate when it came to your own team. This comes from Floyd, and I'm going to maybe change a little bit. I know, by the way, that she's engaged in an M&A competition. Good luck, by the way, Floyd. She's near the final, so we're happy for her and Gene and their team. But when you're communicating with your board, and let's say it's in a transaction, for instance, where there may be some sort of approval, okay? How do you deal with that when the board or the executive team is just dead set on doing a transaction? They're going to do it no matter what, and there's some subtle legal cost or maybe long-term implications that you feel like they're looking over.
Yeah, I think you need to be, in that case, document it, and must be assertive to ensure that everyone understands, whether it be the cost, or the lost opportunity cost in some cases. And you've just got to be consistent with the messaging. You've got to be consistent with communicating it to the board, ensure that they understand, ensure that they're given the opportunity to discuss it and vet it, ask questions. But you've just got to drive that home, because at the end of the day, the business, everybody's going to look to the business. Nobody will remember that, that unless you've got really good board notes. Nobody's going to remember that. They're going to look to the business, and they're going to look back to the CEO and say, hey, what happened? How'd you miss this? And it's similar to what we're looking at right now in our business right now, where we are, we're streamlining the business. We're dividing it up into other pieces and parts. And it's to make sure that we're taking full advantage of the value of the real estate, full advantage of the value of the brand and our technology platform. That said, at the end of the day, there's differing factors that you may not be privy to. You just can't get frustrated by it. You just have to understand that, sometimes you're going to win some with the board, and other times, you're not, and you just move on.
But let me ask you this, though. In how many cases have the lawyers been the ones who get to decide on transactions or even settling litigation?
Oh, it usually just still comes down to a business decision.
Right. My point is zero, mostly,
yeah.
right?
Always comes down to business. Always comes down to the economics of all of it. Yeah. It's not going to come down to, but it's the risk of the economics. It's the risk of doing that deal. It's the risk of not doing that deal. And, yes, up and down. Sometimes the legal team, I know they get really, really frustrated with me. And they're like, there was a case that we just settled. It was widely publicized. It was a lawsuit because we didn't handle some issues correctly with immigration, ICE. And long story short, many wanted to outside counsel, and others were probably technically right, and they were probably correct, that we would have prevailed at a trial. But for me to drag it out another 2 years, it wasn't worth it. It was not worth the impact to my business, to my team, the distraction, wasn't worth the impact to my brand, the bad press, the impact to our franchisees. So there was a lot of frustration, but I was, write the $20 million check. And I had the backing of our board that wanted it to go away as quick as possible for as low a cost as possible. But 20 million was going to be the number. And yes, they're probably still right. Yes, outside counsel still reminds me that they would have prevailed. But I wasn't willing to take the chance. And that's something that I'm going to have to deal with. And, I've accounted for the money. I did my job. I communicated to the board, very transparent. I included all of them in the decision. They were able to weigh the pros and the cons with the correct and the most current information. And we made a business decision.
So I think this might have been the one you shared with me, but there was a little bit of a challenging dynamic in making that decision that if you're okay sharing, I'd love to have you tell us about it just as a learning opportunity for our students.
Yeah, I think that there was the whole case was challenging in that my predecessor and who I inherited this issue, but my predecessor, rather than accepting responsibility, decided to point responsibility elsewhere, and targeted a couple of the properties, a couple of our general managers as an isolated incident, when knowing full well it was not an isolated incident. And the more you dug in, the more we saw that there was a systemic issue with our handling of this. So that was my backdrop. The backdrop from the attorneys was that was not germane to the case, and it was not specific to this matter. And so there was heated discussions, heated debates about the handling it. Now, I am clearly not a trial attorney, nor do I profess to be, but I'm gathering information from various sources, information from our franchise partners who were very frustrated by what this litigation, the impact of it on our brand, gathering feedback from our marketing team and the impact that it was having on our messaging, impact from our development on growth. So you're taking all of this information as well as the impact from our partners at Blackstone, who really want to remain quiet, who don't like the notoriety in the press, whether it be good or bad. So I'm gathering all of this and trying to help manage the this process moving forward. But there was many heated debates, and again, the lawyers were probably technically correct, and had we had an appetite for a longer battle, had we had an appetite to bear more pain in the marketplace, then perhaps we would have gone through the trial and prevailed. But for me, it was, let's rip the Band-Aid off and end this saga so we can move on. But definitely heated dialogue, and I appreciate. Look, we're still friends, and we've got great relationship. They're still our representing us in other matters, and we talk to them all the time, and they're great friends and partners. But we just were vehemently opposed, and to the point where one of the partners in the outside law firm even wanted to go after some of my predecessors with the business, and hold them accountable. And like, this is just not gonna serve anyone. So let's just move on.
I think that's instructive because, and I want this to be one of the key things that everyone remembers, is that in very few cases is it the lawyers who make the ultimate decisions. That's the decision of the business, and your job as a lawyer is to advise on all of the risk and all the legal ramifications to the best of your ability, and then leave it with the executive team, which sometimes includes a lawyer, right? But it's not a determinative therein. Really, that lawyer is acting in a more of a business role than a law role, and deal with it. And that could be in the case of settling litigation, could be in the case of whether or not you want to do a transaction, to one of the earlier comments. And it's important to know your place in the room, but also to read the room, as Rob said, and understand how to play that role appropriately. And you know what? You're going to be frustrated sometimes. I had a situation where I had outside counsel who gave me some advice, and there was certainly discretion in how we would apply it. And I said, we're not going to do that. I was in-house counsel, and he was a little bit offended. And I said, look, I appreciate your advice, and I think that's very helpful, but just because we're going to go a different way doesn't mean that it wasn't good advice. It's just a decision that our company's decided to make. We just have a little bit of time. I'm going to ask you one final question from my perspective. We appreciate all those that the students have added, and I apologize we won't get to all of them. But I'd like to have you address that, Rob, and then I want to talk about a few takeaways, and then we'll end at 1:30 if that's okay.
Yes.
So this is the question is, many of our students, and especially those that are doing joint degrees, but even others that aren't, and certainly our MBA students, they're interested in being executives themselves, okay? So what would be your recommendation for people who actually want to become members of the C-suite, whether it's in a law-related area or otherwise?
Yeah, I would encourage it. I would encourage those individuals to not only obviously be the best that they can be in their role, but also branch out, reach across the aisle to those that are in operations, those that are in marketing, and go walk in their shoes. The best attorneys, that I've always worked with are the ones that, have a good understanding of how the business operates and the issues. And those are the ones that are out there and they're touching the business, and that are involved, not only from a meeting perspective and not only from participating in executive meetings or board meetings, but actually going out there and meeting the field team, walking with them or touring with them, so they can see firsthand some of the issues, the challenges, etc. I think that's the best way to do it, because then you have that credibility as you build your career. And going forward, I think the way technology is moving the world so fast and at such a fevered pace that, candidly, I think you need more attorneys that understand the missteps, because decisions are moving. I mean, with technology, it's insane, the communication, etc. like that. So I think more attorneys that are out there in leadership positions can help to quickly assess, do we go right or do we go left? So I would be a proponent of more taking my role. I think we need more attorneys, JDs that are, with MBAs that are out there as CEOs. My general counsel now, Emma Romaine, I keep pushing her. She's really entrenched in the business. She understands it. She understands the real estate. She understands the brand side. And I keep pushing her, and she's talking about, her next opportunity. And she keeps talking about perhaps maybe a outside firm, go and, become outside counsel. I'm like, no, you're going to go run a business. That's your choice. You have it. You're going to run the business. Your choice is what I decided for you. Go run a business. And she'll be terrific with it. She will be terrific with it, because she picks up things with technology faster than I do, because she knows the impact that that's going to have on privacy. She knows the impact that that's going to have on compliance, or the impact that that could have on, on some state legislation. She gets it instinctively, whereas I look at it from a business perspective. I'm like, wow, this looks terrific. We could have all these email addresses and we can market to customers directly. And she's like, no, you're not doing that. And she instinctively sees this, and she sees the pitfalls. Right now, everyone out there is looking at contact tracing. right, for the COVID virus. Contact tracing, using your mobile device for your team members to trace your team members and et cetera. And everybody is showing us all these great tools. Look, your team members can go in, they can check their temperature, they can do all of these things immediately, and then you can give them a pass or fail whether or not to show up for work or not. And you know, I'm thinking this is terrific. This will help the properties. This will be great from a planning perspective. And council immediately says, no, time out. You've got to pay the team members for use of their device. You've got to pay the team members when they're at home. What's going to happen now that the team member that you've acknowledged now that they're working from home because they've now touched their device, et cetera, now what's going to happen between their home and work are, you know, so they see some of these pitfalls that I think technology will enable, but I think lawyers will see some of these things faster than just a regular business guy. So get involved. Get involved in operations, get involved in marketing, whatever the discipline that inspires you and it excites you. Understand what makes the cash register ring. Use your law background to leverage that. And again, as I started this, you are going to solve the problems that we've left for you. It's not going to be us. Eric and I, we've had our shot at it. You know, you've got to solve the political issues, the social issues, and then, you know, what does the new economy look like? That's going to come to you guys. And so, you know, I'm excited and inspired to see how you're going to solve it. And just don't put me in an old folks home. Not yet.
That's great. Well, I just have a few takeaways, and I will put these on the slides that we upload. But I wanted to mention them just so we can encapsulate it before we end. So first of all, learn how the business works and how it makes money, or what makes the cash register work, as Rob said. Also, develop a communication style that's concise, precise, and quick, and go into detail as needed. Be able to pivot to different methods of communication depending on your audience. So know the room, know your audience. Over prepare and rehearse if necessary. Know who the client is and what your role is in the business or the transaction. Become a trusted source for whomever you're working with. Seek out mentors to help you understand the environment and how to operate in the C-suite. Don't be afraid to ask an executive what their style is and what they would prefer. Help your executives understand and assess risk and make decisions accordingly. Have confidence in yourself and believe in your abilities. Listen and don't translate. Be humble and don't let your boss find out from someone else. So with that, we thank you very much for attending today. Thank you, Rob, so much. This has been very delightful and interesting. We appreciate your time and wish you well in solving all the current problems with or challenges with G6. And we wish everyone a good weekend and take care. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.